um, start. Last time we talked about pru or vu, and I mentioned. Well, we talked about the disputes between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, whether you have to have a boy and a girl, whether um, uh, and then there's the issue which I mentioned last time of the verse um, in Yeshayahu and Isaiah that refers to the fact that God created the universe and did not create it a waste, a tohu, but rather formed it bera'ah lashevet yitzara. He formed it for habitation, lashevet yitzara. And this in the Gemara is taken to refer to the fact that there's an obligation to populate the world. And this comes into the discussion about the commandment of being fruitful and multiply. Most authorities do not consider this, after all, it's in Isaiah, it's not in the Torah, a separate commandment, but a statement about the degree of the commandment of being fruitful and multiply. In other words, if you have two children, you want to make sure that they too will be able to have children. And that really, I think, is the basis of many more Orthodox Jews feeling the need to have many children. In addition to, obviously, the problem of replenishing the Jewish people after the Holocaust. There was one thing that I mentioned at the end of the class last week that I hadn't referred to before, and I wanted to call your attention to it. In the verse that we looked at in Genesis, first chapter of Genesis, where God created male and female, created he them. It says, "Pru or vu umil'u et haaretz," be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. But this word, v'kivshuha, which is translated and master it, lichbosh, to conquer it, to master it. But notice how it is written. One would expect it to have a vav because it is plural, pru or vu. And but here the vav isn't there. And this then is another proof text for those who want to argue that the commandment is only a male commandment. It's singular. Kivshuha is written as if it's only singular, masculine. Obviously, the vowels were added much later. The whole vowel system is a product of the 7th to 9th century of the Common Era. So they were reading as we do when we read Torah with no vowels. And even now, obviously, we see that it doesn't have a vowel. So this is extra proof. We saw that in Genesis, when God speaks to Jacob, and he says, "Pray, pray urve," in the singular, and so this is another proof that for those who want to say pru urvu is only a commandment for males. Here you see it, chapter 35 of Genesis. And God said to him, this is Jacob, Ani El Shaddai, pray urve, in the singular, only men. The commandment, however, if it is a commandment in Isaiah that refers to populating the earth, that is considered a more general command to all human beings. And so that includes, of course, women. So there is a little I wouldn't call it confusion, but some nuances that it's not settled. There's a dispute. I mean, the halacha is settled. It's male, but there is a debate in the Talmud and in the later authorities. Any questions about that? Okay. Yes, Steve.
Yeah, I was always heard that you wouldn't have a mitzvah to endanger your life, and since childbirth was considered dangerous for women, maybe up until modern times, with modern medicine, it was very dangerous to have a baby, that there wouldn't be a mitzvah on women to endanger themselves.
Well, of course, this is, I just read, in fact, yesterday, a small congregation here in Cleveland, Bethel, to which we belong, in addition to being members of B'nai Ashurim. The board of Bethel passed a resolution supporting an effort to overturn an Ohio law regarding abortion. And the argument is that in Jewish law, if in the opinion of the doctor, the mother's life is endangered by the pregnancy, then abortion is required. It's not a choice. The life, and life is determined, human life is determined after birth. We don't believe that an embryo or a fetus is a human being. Judaism is clear that human life begins at birth and not before. And so abortion is required under certain circumstances to preserve the life, and according to some authorities, including this congregation board and including me, it's also the health, both mental and physical health of the mother. That takes precedence over the fetus.
Rabbi, isn't there something about a 90-day delineation between what is potentially human being and not? Water, whatever it is, prior to the 90 days?
Well, there is an understanding that there's a difference between an embryo and a fetus. And the rabbis do talk about the early stages of pregnancy. There is a distinction, obviously, between an embryo and a fetus. But for Jewish law, taking human life applies only after birth, not during pregnancy.
I think Catholics believe life begins at conception.
They didn't always, but they did. They have since St. Augustine. The evidence prior to St. Augustine is that they did not have that belief. Don't tell them, but that's a historical fact. That's only from St. Augustine on. And of course, the argument for Jews is that a law forbidding abortion, even late-term abortion, according to Jewish law, if the mother's life is endangered, that is required, not allowed. It's required to save the mother's life. But obviously, Steve, you're right that that there is a problem even in Cleveland with there's a tremendous disparity between white and black mothers, and there's still a problem with mainly, I guess, it's prenatal care, where many black women do not get appropriate prenatal care, and therefore there's a lot of what used to be quite common, not only for some women, but for all women. And that is, you are absolutely correct that pregnancy is a great danger, can be a great danger to a woman. My father's first wife died after giving birth to my sister. That was not unusual. And for the infants to die very early, you know that we have the ceremony of Pidyon Haben for a firstborn son after 30 days. The rabbis set that as a minimum for the viability of a baby, for there were many, many cases of babies dying before 30 days. So we have made a lot of progress, but Steve, you're right. It's still and will always be a very dangerous situation for any woman. But the commandment of fru or vu is a requirement, it is obviously the first commandment in the Torah. Okay, so yes, Nelson, good to see you. I was told you wouldn't be. I'm glad you're here.
Well, at the last minute, everything worked. So,
Good. I'm so glad.
I'm interested. I'm very interested in what you've been saying, but I'm also interested in another aspect of it, which is commandment to subdue the earth. I've interpreted it to mean the way in which a shepherd would take care of a flock. The shepherd has the right to use some of the flock for his own survival, or maybe its own survival, but his primary responsibility is to bring back more than they left with. And I would also think that for a single woman being a shepherd, that's a very dangerous occupation as compared for a single man, um, which might lend credence to the idea that the commandment is just for males. But it seems to me the idea that subdue means you have total dominion to choose, do anything you want with the earth, is an overstatement.
Yes, well, you know, this can be, for me anyhow, misinterpreted to mean we can do whatever we want with the environment. There is today, obviously, a great concern that we preserve the environment. We are, this is the only place we have. And so this kivshu, which implies kind of conquering, kibush is to conquer, kibush haaretz, to conquer the land, can be, in my view at least, misunderstood to mean that we control everything. Obviously, God controls everything, and we're realizing, I think, more and more now, things that our ancestors didn't understand, and that is that our progress really is endangering the universe that God created. Climate is being affected by our lifestyle, and it's endangering many things. I keep reading about these things that the water is warmer than it used to be, and so certain sea animals are living further north because the water's too warm where they used to live. So they move to the north. There's certain creatures that are becoming extinct because of the climate, and of course the oceans are rising, and certain areas like, for instance, Miami Beach, and other areas along the coast are really under great danger if we don't watch what we're doing and make some changes. So I think we need to be careful how we understand that term vikivshua, and not mistake it to think that we have the power. It's still God's universe, and it's very delicate. Okay, so we're going to go on now. We're skipping a bit just because about you, I'm tired of all of the possibilities of yibum. Oops, wrong one. So we're going on to a, let's see, I think this is it. No, okay, stop share. Stop share. Okay, now we're going to go into here, and let's see if this works. Oh, good. I don't know. Okay, share. Come on. Okay. Not a very comfortable discussion we had today, but let's see if I can't get that. Okay, I'm going to go rid of this. Let's see if I can get it now. Okay, we're skipping to chapter 8. Um, and we're talking here about truma, the food that is limited to Kohanim. These are offerings brought by the farmers at every harvest, required to bring offerings to the Kohen, and certain years, the Maaser, depending on the year, whether it's Maaser Sheni or Maaser Ani for the poor. Maaser Sheni goes to Levites. And so who is permitted to eat the truma? The Kohen has to be ritually pure. And now we're looking at some other concerns with regard to who can partake of the truma. So the Mishnah begins, He'arel, the priest who is not circumcised. Now, why would a priest not be circumcised? Rashi suggests that it is a priest whose brothers were circumcised and died. He had two brothers, older brothers, who were circumcised, and the circumcision caused their death. In such a case, the third brother should not be circumcised, lest he also die. The Tosafot, who are the disciples of Rashi, suggest that it's not that case, but rather someone who is afraid of being circumcised. But in any case, we have in the Mishnah this case of a priest who otherwise would be qualified to eat from the truma. If he is not circumcised, he cannot eat from the truma. Not only that, but also tameim, anyone who is ritually impure. They may not eat from the truma, but their wives and their slaves may eat from the truma. They may not, but their wives and slaves may.
Nice. Nice for the slaves.
Pardon me?
Nice for the slaves.
Jewish slaves. In other words, Jews who are in debt to the Kohen and are serving the Kohen for 7 years. Well, for 6 years. 7th year, he'll go free.
Rabbi,
Yes.
how can a baby who hasn't been circumcised be afraid?
No, it can't be, obviously. That's why I don't like the explanation. Maybe the mother's afraid. The mother's afraid. But then the priest has an obligation when he grows up to be circumcised. The father has the obligation, but if the father doesn't do it, the uncircumcised has the obligation to be circumcised. So I think Rashi's explanation makes more sense here. I don't understand how you can say that a baby's going to be afraid. Obviously, a baby will be afraid. Huh?
We have the case of Moses, who didn't circumcise his sons, and his wife did.
Yes, that's a very strange story. Very odd.
Robert, so
Yes, Steve.
when a male child is born of a Jewess, is he a Jew when he's born or when he enters the covenant on this 8th day?
He is a Jew. However, we're going to see that he's limited. We're going to see that from the Torah itself. Let's go back into the text. I have that Torah portion here, and let's see. I'll come to it. Let's continue in this Mishnah, and then we'll see that the limitations of an arel. But let's go on in this Mishnah. We're talking now about two types of injuries, patsua daka and chut shofcha. These are damages to a man's genitalia. The first one, patsua daka, refers to a man who has crushed testicles, and chrut shofcha is one whose penis has been cut off. Such men, ve'avdehen, and their slaves, it says, they may partake of the truma, but the translation, which is a commentary, it is prohibited from them to marry a woman who was born Jewish, yet they may eat from the truma. Now, it's that I wanted to show you. First, in Dvarim, we have in chapter 23, the verse that says, Lo yavo v'tzua daka uchrut shofcha. These are the two things that the Mishnah is talking about. Bikahal Hashem. These men whose genitalia have been damaged, and therefore they cannot have children, but according to this particular verse, they cannot come into Kahal Hashem, which is understood to mean that they cannot marry a Jewish woman, a woman born Jewish. But the Mishnah continues, Im lo yeda'a mi shena'asa psua daka uchrut shofcha, harei elu yochelu. If their wives, okay, so they and their slaves may partake of the truma, but their wives, it says, unashehem lo yochelu. But men who have, that is kohanim, who have these genitalia problems, their wives may not eat from the truma. But if they have not had sex, that's the meaning of yada, to know. This is, of course, when Adam knew Eve, she was pregnant. And that's the nice way of saying they had sex. If they didn't have sex after his genitalia were damaged, then hare elu yochelu. Then their wives may partake of the truma. Why is this? Our translation explains it. The wives may not partake of truma if they have had sex while his genitalia were damaged, because if after the genitalia were damaged they have sex, the woman is considered to be a halala. Halala. We've seen this word, halal, chol. She is disqualified from marrying a priest. Why? Because their sexual relationship is forbidden. Why is it forbidden? Because he cannot have a child. His genitalia have been damaged in such a way, they assume, that now, obviously, if the penis was cut off, I'm not sure how they could have sex, but if a priest did not, however, have sex with his wife after his testicles were crushed or his penis severed, then she is not a halala, and she is permitted to eat from the truma. So the Mishnah, again, there's no dispute in this Mishnah. It's all one opinion that the uncircumcised, as well as priests who are ritually impure, may not partake of the truma, though their wives and slaves, Jewish slaves, part of the household, they may partake of the truma. And of course, it doesn't say this, but we can assume that their children also may partake of the truma. However, a man whose genitalia have been damaged, he and his slaves, they may partake of the truma after this injury, though their wives may not, assuming that this man has had sex with his wife. If he didn't have sex, then the wife may also partake of the truma. Now, I wanted to look with you at Leviticus, where we have the laws about the priests, the Kohanim, the sons of Aaron, the descendants of Aaron. No man of Aaron's offspring who has an tsarua, he is suffering from tsara'at, normally mistranslated as leprosy. That's what Miriam had. That is a skin disease. We know it's not leprosy, but it is a disease of the skin. Or he is in other ways impure, including zav. Zav refers to a ejaculation, could be what we used to call a wet dream, and that makes the priest impure, and therefore he may not eat of the teruma, lo yochal, ad asher yitar, until he goes through the process of purification. which requires, in some cases, waiting until the day is over and immersing in the mikveh prior to that. If one touches anything made impure by a corpse, hanogea b'chol tamei nefesh, o ish asher teitzei mimenu shichvat zera. If one touches anything made impure by a corpse, or if a man has an emission of semen, that's the zav, that is a cause of impurity. Or if he touches anything, a swarming thing, a sheretz, that also causes impurity, or any other cause of ritual impurity. There is a whole volume, a whole seder called Tohorot, which really details all of these sources of impurity. Obviously, the most serious, the one that causes the most impurity is the dead human body. But there are other sources of impurity, and we're mentioning some of them here. The person who touches such shall be impure until evening, and shall not eat of the kodashim, should not eat the truma, or from the offerings, from the korbanot, korbanot that were not completely burned, which were the daily sacrifices, which were known as olot, olah. Those were completely burned. Those were holocausts. They were completely burned, and they were for God. But other sacrifices, like for instance, korban shalamim, the offerings that were brought as free will offerings, those were shared with the priests. But a priest who is impure cannot partake of those offerings until he goes through a purification process. But as soon as the sun sets, if you remember, we learned this in the first Mishnah we learned, which was what time is the Shema said in the evening, and that was determined at the time that the priests can eat truma. And we understood that to mean a priest who was impure and goes through a purification process, he can then eat the truma as soon as the sun sets, which is the beginning of the time of reciting the evening Shema. Afterwards, he may eat of the kodashim, ki lachmohu, for they are his food. That's what they are meant for. Questions? None. Good. Okay. So we can go on to the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah now is talking about the things that were already mentioned, who is deemed a Petsua Daka? Who is deemed a man with crushed testicles? Kol sheniftzeu habeitzim shelo. One of the jokes that is common in Israel among Hebrew speakers, Beitzah is an egg. And the plural of Beitzah is Beitzim. Beitz means a testicle. The plural of Beitz is Beitzim. So therefore, Beitzim could mean eggs or could mean testicles. And so you need to be careful. Anyhow, Kol sheniftzeu habeitzim shelo, any man whose testicles were wounded, afilu achat mehen, even if only one of the testicles was wounded. And then it says, uchrut shofcha. What is a krut shofcha? And it says that's someone whose penis has been cut off. Penis here is called gid. Gid. As for the measure that renders him unfit, im nishtayer meha atara, if a piece of the corona of the penis is still remains, even if it's as small as a chut hasa'ara, a hair's breadth, a very tiny bit, then kasher. Then he is not considered a chut shofcha and is allowed to eat the truma. However, if nothing at all is left of the corona, he's considered as one with a severed penis for whom he is forbidden to marry a Jewish woman. That is, he cannot come into Kahal Hashem. But mutarin begioret umeshuchreret, but a man with crushed testicles or other wounds to his genitals and one whose penis has been severed, those people, those men are permitted to marry a convert or an emancipated slave. They are permitted only from entering into the congregation. Lo yavo petsua daka uchrut shofcha b'kahal Hashem. This verse that we saw above is quoted here in the Mishnah. Einan, they are not forbidden except to come into the kahal, meaning they cannot marry a woman born Jewish and free. Such a man with those genital problems is not permitted to marry a Jewish-born woman.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Yes, Elliot.
Anyhow, there's a lot here about the anatomy of the male. Are there no references in the text anywhere to the anatomy of the female, and maybe she would have some deformed components?
Well, we saw already the term Ailonit, a woman whose genital parts are not fully formed and therefore cannot have children. So we've already seen that. And I'm sure there's more in the text. Any other questions? Okay, so let's go back to the Mishnah text. Um, uh, these are terms that, as you have seen, are biblical terms, and they then go into the Mishnah and are defined in the Mishnah. We continue now, even though it has nothing to do with the subject of our tractate, which you'll recall is levirate marriage, but we have gone completely off the subject, and we continue off that subject. Now, but I think it's interesting, and that's why I including this, that the Ammonite and the Moabite converts. Well, the text is Ammonite and Moabite are prohibited from entering the congregation. That is, they cannot marry a woman who is born Jewish. And this is a Isur Olam. This is a prohibition that is without end. It is le'olam, forever, for all generations. However, this applies only to the men, not to the women. The women, that is Moabite, like, for instance, Ruth, in the book of Ruth, was a Moabite, as was Orpah, her sister. They married Machlon and Chilion, and of course, Ruth became the ancestor of King David, according to the end of the book of Ruth. So for Moabite women and Ammonite women, they are permitted to marry Jewish men. And it is immediate. That is, there's no restriction. Now we're going to talk about Egyptians, Mitzri, and Edomi, Edom. So these are, of course, all peoples surrounding the land of Israel, with whom our ancestors had confrontations. The Egyptians and the Edomites, men, Einam Asurim, are permitted only, are forbidden, that is, only for the first 3 generations. That is, after they settle in the land, both male and female. Now here we have a dispute because Rabbi Shimon disagrees and says the female, even of the Egyptians and Edomites, are permitted immediately, permitted to marry Jews. Rabbi Shimon then goes on to explain Kal vachomer hadevarim. Kal vachomer. You may be familiar with those words, Kal vachomer. This is one of the principles on which the Torah is to be interpreted. You know, at the beginning of the morning service, we do a little study of Torah. And the traditional text that is studied are the 13 principles of interpretation of Rabbi Eliezer. And one of them is Kal Vachomer. And Kal means simple or easy, and Chomer means more complex or heavier. So it is a logical matter. If something that is not as important is forbidden, then something that is more important would certainly be forbidden. And this is very commonly used, and one that makes a lot of sense. So here Rabbi Shimon is explaining his position, allowing Egyptian and Edomite women to converts to marry immediately and not to wait 3 generations. And here is his explanation. Uma im bimkom she'asar et hazcharim isur olam hitir et hanekevot miyad makom shelo asar et hazcharim ela ad 3 dorot eino din. Isn't it logical? Shenatir et hanekevot miyad. So the argument is this. If at the beginning of this Mishnah, we said that male Ammonites and Moabites are forbidden forever, but their women are immediately allowed, that's what we said with Ammonite and Moabite. There's no possibility ever for an Ammonite or Moabite man to join the Jewish people, but women are immediately allowed. So Rabbi Shimon says if that's the case with the Ammonites and Moabites, then with the Egyptians and Edomites, we're saying that for men, it's not forever that they're forbidden, but only for 3 generations are they forbidden to convert and join the Jewish people. Women should be allowed immediately. If they're allowed immediately and the men are forbidden forever, so if men are forbidden for only 3 generations, then of course women should be admitted immediately, just like in the Ammonite and Moabite. It's chamor, it's much more strict there. Never can the men become Jews. We allow the women immediately. With regard to the Egyptians and Edomites, we're only limiting the men for 3 generations. So of course, we should allow the women immediately. He's making an argument that in Latin is known as a fortiori, kal vachomer. It is if we allow the women immediately in a more strict situation for the men, then of course for a less strict situation for the men, we're going to allow them immediately. This is the argument of Rabbi Shimon. Let's go back to the Hebrew, because this language is very, very common particularly not so much in the Mishnah, but in the Midrash, Kal Vachomer, and of course in the Gemara. I don't recall seeing it that often in the Mishnah, but Kal Vachomer is very frequent in traditional texts. And it almost always, anyhow, starts off, Ma'im, if it's like that in a strict case, then of course it's going to be like that in a less strict situation. Eino din, is it not logical that we should allow the women immediately? Now, the Chachamim respond to Rabbi Shimon and they say, Im halacha nekabel, ve'im ladin yesh tshuva. If, say, the response is his colleagues said to him, that is, the Chachamim respond, if you are reporting a halacha, and the translation is really an explanation, that you received from your teachers, then we'll accept it from you. But if you merely wish to prove your case with the Kal Vachomer that you are introducing on the basis of your own reasoning, yesh teshuvah, there is a refutation. Teshuvah normally means answer, but in the traditional text, it can mean a refutation, just the opposite of an answer. He then responds to them, lo chi. It's not that. Halacha ani omer. I am indeed quoting something I learned from my teachers. The Mishnah then continues, that conversation ends, and the Mishnah continues, mamzerin unetinim asurin. The Isuran Olam, Echad Zecharim, Echad Nekevot. There's Mamzerim, we've talked about them, and Netinim, which we've seen before, is understood to be the Gibeonites, who were, in the time of Joshua, were admitted, but not completely. They were considered to be carriers of water and carriers of wood. They were kind of admitted, but not admitted. And so they are prohibited, both male and female, mamzerim and netinim, and this goes forever. Again, just like with the Ammonites and the Moabites, so it is also with the Mamzerim and the Gibeonites forever. They are not permitted to join the Jewish people. Any questions? Okay, we'll go on, Im Yirtzeh Hashem, next week. We're coming into what I mentioned a couple weeks ago, the laws of conversion. And it's interesting that this is the place for that. Stay well, and we'll, God willing, meet again next week. Kol Tuf.